They didn't just betray me. They smiled while they did it. And for 3 years, I let them. I said nothing. I cried alone. I kept their secrets like they were my own sins. But silence has a breaking point. And the day I reached mine changed everything. For all of us, I want you to really hear this story, not just listen to it, hear it. Because what happened to me isn't some dramatic movie plot. It's real. It happens slowly, the way most painful things do. Not all at once. Not with one big explosion. Just quietly, painfully, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left of me. My name is Renee. I'm 34 years old. I live in a small city in Ohio, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if you were loyal, if you worked hard, if you loved people deeply and kept your mouth shut when things got messy, good things would come back to you eventually. I genuinely believed that. It was basically the foundation of how I lived. I was wrong. But here's the thing about being wrong in that particular way. You don't just get hurt, you get used. And the people doing the using, they never even lose sleep over it. This is the story of how my husband, his mother, my best friend, and my own sister quietly dismantled my life. And how I stood in the wreckage, rebuilt myself brick by brick, and then watched everything they built on my back come crashing down. Was I wrong for what I did? I'll let you decide. Let me start at the beginning, because context matters here. You need to understand who I was before all of this happened, because who I was is exactly why they chose me. I grew up in a working-class family in Dayton. My dad worked at a manufacturing plant for 30 years. My mom cleaned houses on the side to make sure my sister Becca and I had everything we needed. They weren't rich, but they were good people. Honest people. They taught me that family was everything, that you showed up for the people you loved no matter what. That loyalty wasn't something you turned on and off depending on the situation. It was a value you carried with you, full time, no exceptions. Becca is 3 years older than me. Growing up, she was the pretty one, the social one, the one who walked into rooms and made friends instantly. I was quieter, more of a reader, more of a listener. I didn't mind being in her shadow. That's just how it was. But looking back now, I think that dynamic taught Becca something that would eventually destroy us both. That I was someone who could be overlooked. That I would always be there, quietly, no matter how she treated me. That my love for her was unconditional in a way that she could take advantage of. I met my husband Marcus when I was 24. He was 27, charming, funny, in the specific way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. He wasn't rich. He was working as a project manager at a mid-sized construction company, but he was ambitious. He talked about the future constantly, about building something real, about us being a team. I fell hard. I fell fast, and I married him 18 months after our first date. His mother, Sandra, was a different story from the very beginning. She was one of those women who presents herself as warm and generous on the surface, but has this undercurrent of control running through everything she does. She'd offer to help you and then hold that help over your head for years. She'd give compliments that somehow left you feeling smaller than before she'd said them. She doted on Marcus in a way that I can only describe as obsessive. Like, she hadn't fully accepted that he was a grown man who'd chosen his own life. From the day Marcus and I got together, Sandra made it very clear, without ever saying it directly, that I wasn't good enough for her son. I wasn't the type she'd imagined for him. I didn't come from the right background. I wasn't as polished as his previous girlfriend, a woman named Danielle, who Sandra still mentioned, casually, innocently, at least once a month for the entire first 2 years of our marriage. But I told myself I could win her over. I told myself she just needed time. I told myself that if I was patient enough, kind enough, consistent enough, she'd eventually see me for who I really was and accept me. 3 years in, she still hadn't. But by then, I had bigger problems. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in October. I remember the specific day because it was the day after our 3rd wedding anniversary, and I had stayed up late the night before, making Marcus a scrapbook of photos and letters from our time together. Something personal, something that took me weeks to put together. He'd looked at it for maybe 4 minutes, said it was sweet, and gone to bed early because he had a work thing the next morning. I told myself he was tired. I told myself not to read into it. The Tuesday in October, I was working from home, as I usually did. I'm a freelance accountant. I work with small businesses, keep my own hours, handle my own clients. I'd been building that business for almost 5 years by that point, and it was doing well. Really well, actually. Well enough that I was carrying most of our household expenses, while Marcus's company went through a rough patch. I wasn't resentful about that. I want to be clear about that. I didn't carry that over his head. We were a team, his words, but I believed them. And teams show up for each other. That Tuesday, I got up to refill my coffee, and Marcus had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He'd run out to grab something from his car and wasn't back yet. I wasn't snooping. I genuinely wasn't. But the screen was open to his email, and the name in the subject line stopped me like I'd walked into a glass wall. The name was Cassandra. Cassandra was my best friend, or she had been, for 15 years. We'd met in college. She was my maid of honor at my wedding. She'd held my hand in the hospital waiting room the year before when I'd had a miscarriage, and I was so broken I couldn't speak. She was the person I called when I didn't know who else to call. The subject line of the email said, "Last night was everything." I stood there in my kitchen, in my socks, holding my coffee mug, and I read that email. I read the whole thing, and then I read the thread above it, and then I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. They had been together for 8 months. 8 months of my marriage had been a lie. 8 months of dinner parties where Cassandra sat across from me, laughing at my jokes, hugging me goodbye, asking me how I was doing. 8 months of Marcus kissing me on the forehead before he left for what he called late nights at the office. 8 months. And here's the worst part, the part that I still, to this day, can barely say out loud. He had borrowed $40,000 from our joint savings account to take her on trips. 4 trips, Paris, Cancun, Nashville, Napa, all in 8 months. All while he told me we needed to be careful with money. All while I was working 60-hour weeks to keep our household running. I put my phone down. I picked it back up. I put it down again, and then I closed his laptop, walked back to my desk, and went back to work. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront him when he came back inside 2 minutes later, talking about traffic and asking if there was anything for lunch. I just went silent. And that was the beginning. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you confront him? Why didn't you call Cassandra and blow the whole thing up right then? I've thought about that a lot, and the honest answer is complicated. Part of it was shock. Pure, complete, body-numbing shock. Part of it was that I genuinely didn't trust myself to act without falling apart completely. But a bigger part of it, the part I'm most honest with myself about now, was that I had learned something in that kitchen, standing there reading those emails, something cold and clear. I had learned that I was surrounded by people who were very comfortable lying to me, very comfortable using me. And the only advantage I had, the only thing that gave me any power at all, was that they didn't know I knew. So I kept quiet. I kept the secret, and I started paying attention. What I found over the next 6 weeks made the emails look like the opening chapter of a much longer, much worse story. The $40,000 was just the beginning. As I started quietly going through our finances, me, the accountant, the woman who'd been trusting her husband to handle the big picture while she handled client work, I realized that the damage was far deeper. Marcus had taken out a personal loan in both our names without telling me. He'd deferred payments on our home equity line of credit for 3 months, racking up fees. He'd missed a tax payment on the business we'd started together 2 years prior. Our small property management side venture that was entirely in both our names, and hadn't told me. We weren't just losing money, we were quietly hemorrhaging it, and he'd been hiding every piece of it. I made spreadsheets. I requested statements. I documented everything with the kind of methodical calm that I think only truly quiet rage can produce. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't emotional. I was focused in a way I had never been in my life. Because I was building something, I just didn't know exactly what yet. Around week 3 of my silent investigation, Becca called me. She wanted to get lunch, just the two of us, catch up, she said. I agreed. I showed up, and over pasta salad and iced tea, my sister, my blood, my family, said something that cracked me open in a way that even the emails hadn't. She said very carefully, very gently, that she'd heard through mutual friends that Marcus and I had been going through a rough patch. That she just wanted me to know she was there for me. That sometimes relationships go through hard phases, and the important thing was communication. I looked at her across the table, and I said, calmly, "Where did you hear that?" She got a little flustered. Said something about it just being around. I said, "From Cassandra?" Long pause. She said, "Renee, I said, "It's fine." And I changed the subject, and we finished lunch. But I knew. Becca knew. Becca had known for God knows how long and hadn't said a word to me. My sister, the person who I'd grown up sleeping in the same room with, the person who'd borrowed money from me twice in the past 5 years, a total of $9,000, which she'd slowly paid back, but had needed desperately both times, and I had given it without hesitation. That person had known my husband was cheating with my best friend, and had looked me in the eye, month after month, and said nothing. I drove home from that lunch and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, and then I went inside, made dinner, and kept moving. What I did next, I want to be clear, was not impulsive. It was not emotional. It was the result of 6 weeks of careful, methodical, fully intentional planning. I want you to understand that because I think it matters. What I did wasn't revenge in the hot, messy, explosion of emotion sense. It was something closer to a controlled demolition, and I'd been very quietly laying the charges for a long time. The first thing I did was call my accountant friend, Lorraine, a woman I trusted completely, someone completely outside my social circle, and I had her help me separate my finances, quietly, legally. I opened new accounts in my name only. I began redirecting my freelance income, which was entirely my own, to those accounts. I made a list of every asset that was mine before the marriage and every asset that was shared. Then I called a divorce attorney named Patricia. I want to say her name because she was remarkable. She was small and calm and spoke in a voice like still water, and she told me exactly what my rights were, what I was entitled to, and most importantly, what I needed to document before I made a single move. I'd already documented most of it. She was impressed. She told me I had a very strong case. Then I did something that nobody expected. I called Sandra, Marcus's mother, the woman who had made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage for 3 years. I called her and I asked if she'd like to have coffee. She was surprised. You could hear it in her voice, but she said yes. We met at a coffee shop near her house on a Wednesday morning. She came in with that particular energy she always had, half warmth, half superiority, like she was doing me a favor by showing up. We made small talk for a few minutes, and then I put a folder on the table. I told her, very quietly, that I was divorcing her son, that I had documentation of financial fraud, infidelity, and misrepresentation going back 9 months, that I had already consulted with an attorney, and that I was giving her this information first, before Marcus, because I wanted to give her the chance to stop enabling what was happening. She stared at me. I told her that Cassandra had been staying, on Marcus's dime, which was actually my dime, at a hotel Sandra owned a stake in. I'd found that in the financial records. That meant Sandra had, at minimum, looked the other way. I watched the color drain out of her face. I closed the folder. I told her I didn't need anything from her. I just wanted her to know what her son had built on my back. I left her sitting there with her untouched coffee, and I walked out into the parking lot, and I sat in my car, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I cried. Not from pain, from relief. I served Marcus the divorce papers on a Friday evening. I had already moved my essential belongings to a furnished apartment I'd quietly rented 2 weeks prior. I handed him the envelope, I told him I knew everything, and I left. He called 11 times that night. I didn't pick up. He showed up at Cassandra's apartment. Yes, I knew the address. And apparently the two of them had a very loud, very ugly fight that her neighbors later described to mutual friends in spectacular detail. Cassandra, it turned out, had not known the full extent of Marcus's financial situation. She hadn't known about the loan. She hadn't known about the missed payments. She had believed he was more stable than he was because he'd been performing stability for her the same way he'd been performing it for me. When she found out that the Paris trip had been funded with money from our shared savings, she was, apparently, horrified, or at least she performed horror very convincingly. They did not stay together after that. That part was quick. Marcus's legal situation, however, was not. Patricia was thorough and precise, and the financial documentation I had built over those 6 weeks was, in her words, unusually complete. The personal loan taken without my full informed consent, the deliberate concealment of financial information from a joint partner. These had legal weight. The settlement process was not pleasant, but it was effective. I received my full share of our joint assets, plus damages related to the misused savings. The property management business we'd started together, I bought him out at a price Patricia negotiated beautifully. That business, which Marcus had started to see as his little side project, was the seed of something that grew over the next 2 years into my most significant source of income. He sold his share for far less than it would eventually be worth. I think about that sometimes. Now, Becca. My sister, Becca, is the part of this story that took the longest. The financial and legal pieces with Marcus moved quickly. The emotional reckoning with Becca, that was slow. It was the piece that required the most patience and, honestly, the most grief. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to understand what I actually wanted from her. An explanation, an apology, some version of accountability. I spent a lot of time sitting with that question because the anger I felt toward Becca was different from the anger I felt toward Marcus or Cassandra. They had actively hurt me. Becca had simply watched and said nothing, and I had to decide whether that was better or worse. Eventually, about 3 months after the divorce was filed, I called her. I told her I knew she'd known. I told her what that silence had cost me. I told her that the $9,000 I'd loaned her over the years, money I had genuinely given without strings, without expectation, felt different to me now. Not because I wanted it back, but because it made the silence feel like a transaction. Like maybe the loyalty had always been one-directional, and I'd just been too trusting to see it. Becca cried. She apologized. She said she didn't know how bad it was. She said she thought it wasn't her place to get involved. She said Cassandra had told her not to say anything, and she hadn't wanted to lose the friendship. There it was. She hadn't wanted to lose Cassandra's friendship. I told Becca that I loved her because she was my sister and that would never fully go away, but that I needed significant distance from her, possibly indefinitely. That trust, once broken, that completely, couldn't just be patched up with a phone call and some tears. She asked what she could do. I told her I didn't know. I told her that was her work to figure out. And I hung up. The karma part of this story, the part that I want to be careful about because I don't want to sound like I'm celebrating other people's pain, happened mostly on its own. I didn't engineer it. I didn't plan it. I was already 2 years out from the divorce by the time the dominoes really started falling. And by then, I was genuinely in a different place. I had my apartment. I had my growing business. I had a small, carefully chosen circle of people I trusted. I was rebuilding myself in a way that felt real and solid and mine. Marcus had moved in with a college friend after the divorce proceedings drained a significant portion of his savings. The settlement had not been kind to him, partly because of the financial misconduct, and partly because Patricia was simply very good at her job. He'd also lost standing at his company, not because of me, I want to be clear, but because the personal loan he'd taken out had been co-signed by a colleague there, and when that colleague found out the context, things became very uncomfortable. He eventually left that job. I heard through people that he was freelancing in construction consulting, which was fine. That was his life to figure out. Cassandra went through her own storm. After Marcus, she'd gotten involved with another man, someone from her gym, and it came out in her social circle that she had been with a married man for nearly a year. The mutual friends who had been carefully neutral through my divorce suddenly weren't so neutral anymore. Slowly, gradually, the social warmth she'd always moved through so effortlessly began to cool. People stopped inviting her to things. She moved to a different part of the city. I heard she was doing okay, eventually, working at a marketing firm, keeping a lower profile. I didn't feel good about her struggles, but I won't pretend I felt bad either. Somewhere in the middle of those two feelings, I just felt finished. And Sandra, who had never fully accepted me, who had looked the other way at her son's behavior for so long, Sandra had her own reckoning. It came from an unexpected direction, Marcus himself. In the aftermath of everything, with his finances fractured and his stability gone, he began leaning on her heavily. Like and comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever been in a situation where staying silent was the hardest and smartest thing you ever did, you already know exactly what I mean.